I wasn't trying to make anyone feel guilty. I was trying to make people feel something. Because when we stop feeling, we stop caring. And when we stop caring, we start hurting each other without even realizing it. This is a story of a little girl, Amara, who has been a victim of bullies and segregation from both students and some of the school's teachers in her school because of her skin color. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button to this channel, and please help us like our videos. The bell rang, echoing through the empty hallways of Crestwood Middle School, a place that should have felt safe. But for Amara Johnson, it never did. Her footsteps were small but steady, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor as laughter trailed behind her. It wasn't kind of laughter that warms a room. It was sharp, mocking, cold. "Hey, charcoal!" someone shouted from behind. Another voice joined. "Don't touch her. You'll get dirty." The hall erupted in giggles, cruel and careless. Amara froze for a moment, her fingers tightening around the straps of her worn-out backpack. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She knew their faces. The same faces that sneered when she raised her hand in class. The same ones that rolled their eyes whenever she spoke. Crestwood was a mostly white school in a quiet town that pretended racism was a thing of the past. They called themselves colorblind. Yet somehow, Amara's skin was the first thing they saw every single day. She was the only black girl in her grade, and for many of them, the only black face they'd ever sat beside. The teachers didn't help much. They'd say, "Ignore them, Amara," with the same tired tone used for lost causes. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. When she answered too many questions correctly, they assumed she cheated. When she spoke with confidence, they called her aggressive. When she stayed quiet, they called her timid. There was no right way to exist in her skin. But what no one saw was what happened when she went home. Her mother's small apartment was lined with books. Thick, heavy ones about history, science, and people who changed the world. Every night, Amara read them cover to cover. She studied harder than anyone else, not because she wanted to prove them wrong, but because she wanted to prove herself right, that her dreams weren't too big for her skin. When the results of the final exams came out, the entire school buzzed with curiosity. They gathered around the board, scanning the list of names, until silence fell like a shadow over the crowd. There it was in bold letters, valedictorian, Amara Johnson. The disbelief was almost comical. Some students gasped. Others whispered excuses. One of the teachers even double-checked the results, as if there had been a mistake. Amara watched quietly from a corner, her hands clasped together. She didn't smile. She'd expected it. She'd earned it. A week later, the principal called her into the office. "Amara," she said, adjusting her glasses, "as valedictorian, you'll give the closing speech at the graduation ceremony." Her tone was polite but hesitant, as though she doubted whether Amara could handle such a responsibility. Amara simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Word spread quickly. The same students who once threw paper at her now whispered behind cupped hands. Some scoffed, saying she would embarrass herself. Others laughed that she'd probably cry on stage. But Amara didn't react. For the first time, she had their full attention, and that was exactly what she needed. The day of graduation arrived beneath a clear blue sky. Parents filled the gymnasium. Teachers sat proudly in the front row, and students buzzed with excitement. Banners hung from the walls, cameras flashed, and the air smelled faintly of flowers and floor polish. But behind the brightness, an unspoken tension lingered, whispers of disbelief that a black girl, once mocked and dismissed, would stand at the podium. When Amara's name was called, she walked up the stage in her pressed uniform and scuffed shoes. Her small frame seemed almost swallowed by the stage lights, but her steps were steady. The murmurs began again, quiet, uncertain. She stood there for a moment, her fingers gripping the edges of the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at the faces before her, the same faces that once laughed, ignored, and looked down on her, the same faces that had doubted her every step. And for the first time, she wasn't scared, because Amara knew something they didn't. She knew that words had power, the same power they once used to hurt her. She was about to use to heal, to teach, to silence them. The crowd shifted, waiting for her to speak. Some expected a shy thank you. Others, maybe an apology. But what came next would be something none of them would ever forget. She took a deep breath, looked straight ahead, and began her speech. And with her very first line, the entire hall fell silent. The gym was packed, yet somehow it felt like every sound had been swallowed by silence. Amara stood at the podium, the bright lights washing over her, making her small frame look even smaller. She could see everyone. Students whispering behind half-hidden smirks, teachers sitting stiffly in their rows, and the principal with a rehearsed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took a deep breath. The paper in her hand trembled, but her voice didn't. When I first came to this school, she began, I thought it was a place where people were treated equally, a place where respect was earned through hard work, not given based on how someone looks. The audience stirred. A few students glanced around. A teacher cleared his throat. But Amara continued, calm and deliberate. I learned that people talk a lot about fairness. But fairness doesn't live in words. It lives in actions. It's not what we say. It's what we do when no one is watching. It's what we do when someone different walks into the room. Her eyes swept across the hall, stopping briefly on a group of girls who used to snicker. When she walked by, their smiles had vanished. I learned, she said softly, that being the only black girl in classroom means you sometimes become a mirror for everyone else's assumptions. You're either too loud, too quiet, too confident, too much. You spend years trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you, and still you show up. The teachers sat frozen. One of them, Mr. Dalton, who had once mistaken her name for another student's every single week, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Amara continued, her tone growing firmer. When I got the top score on the exam, some people didn't say, congratulations. They said, how? As if excellence is a color. Gasps moved through the crowd. The principal's eyes widened, her polite composure cracking. Amara paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But I'm not angry, she said, because I realize something. You don't fight ignorance with anger. You fight it with truth. You fight it by showing up again and again until people have no... Her voice grew stronger. And for the teachers here today, I want you to know something. Students remember the ones who see them, but they never forget the ones who don't. The things you say or don't say can shape how we see ourselves. If you lower expectations for one student, you plant doubt in every student watching. A hush swept across the hall. Even the smallest children were quiet now, hanging on to her every word. Amara lifted her chin, her voice trembling only slightly as emotion filled it. We say school prepares us for the real world. But the truth is, school is a real world. And if we don't learn to treat people with respect here, we're already failing before we graduate. Her gaze softened as she looked around at the faces, red eyes, bowed heads, uneasy silence. We are all learning. We are all growing. So, let's start growing in the right direction. Let's make this a place where no one has to shrink just to feel accepted. She closed her notebook slowly. Because I've learned that the loudest lessons don't come from who talks the most. They come from who listens. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, almost sacred. Then, one by one, people began to rise to their feet. First a teacher, then a student, then another, until the entire gym stood clapping, not with noise, but with understanding. Amara smiled faintly, though tears shimmered in her eyes. For the first time, she felt seen, not as the black girl, but as herself. As she stepped down from the stage, Principal Harris approached her with trembling hands. Amara, she whispered, her voice breaking, you've just taught the school something no curriculum ever could. Amara nodded politely, but her mind was far away, because as she looked around the crowd, students hugging, teachers wiping tears, she wondered one thing. Would they remember tomorrow? Would they truly change? That question lingered in her heart, like an unfinished sentence. And that was the real test, one no exam could measure. The next morning, Crestwood Middle School didn't feel the same. The halls that once echoed with laughter and gossip now carried whispers of reflection. Posters that had hung untouched for months suddenly looked out of place. Images of Diversity Week that once felt performative now seemed painfully hollow. Students walked slower. Teachers looked uncertain. Everyone had heard the speech, and everyone knew it wasn't just a speech. It was a mirror. In every classroom, Amara's words lingered. Fairness doesn't live in words. It lives in actions. Mr. Dalton, the history teacher who'd once mistaken Amara's name for another student's, stared at his lesson plan that morning and quietly tore it in half. He looked up at his students and said, "Today we're going to talk about what history really means." Mrs. Clark, who had once doubted Amara's essay, sat at her desk long after class ended, staring at the empty seats. For the first time, she realized how easy it was to wound a child with a single careless assumption. She picked up her pen and began writing a letter, not to the principal, but to Amara. Even the principal, Mrs. Harris, found herself standing in front of the school's mission statement on the wall. A place for every student. She whispered the words slowly, realizing they hadn't always been true. By lunchtime, the story of Amara's speech had already spread beyond the school walls. Parents talked about it at the grocery store. Teachers from nearby districts shared it online. The local newspaper ran a headline the next morning. Student speech on equality moves entire school to silence. And within a few days, it reached the office of the county governor. Governor Elaine Porter, a woman known for her strict professionalism and rarely for emotion, sat behind her desk reading the printed article. She read it twice. Then again, there was something about this 12-year-old girl. Her words, her courage, that struck deeper than any policy meeting or campaign ever had. The next week, an official black car pulled up outside Crestwood Middle School. The governor stepped out, surrounded by reporters, and the students gathered in disbelief. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Amara stood at the back, unsure what was happening until the governor's voice cut through the noise. "I came here today," Governor Porter said, "because I read the words of a young girl who reminded this county what leadership looks like. Leadership is not about age, title, or power. It's about truth." And Amara Johnson spoke the kind of truth that even adults sometimes forget. The students turned to look at Amara, their faces a mix of pride and guilt. The governor continued, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "In a world that too often divides by color, background, or status, this child, this student, reminded us that real education begins when we see one another fully. I believe what she said here at Crestwood Middle should be heard far beyond these walls." The principal's eyes widened. "Madam Governor," she said, stepping forward, "do you mean?" "Yes," the governor said, nodding firmly. "I want this school to lead by example. Starting today, Crestwood Middle will launch a new program, one dedicated to equality, empathy, and representation in education, and I would like Amara Johnson to help us name it." The courtyard erupted in applause. Cameras flashed again, but Amara wasn't smiling for attention. She was smiling because something had changed, something real. That afternoon, the students who once teased her came to her desk. One of them, a boy named Tyler, the one who used to call her Charcoal, stared at the floor, then said quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how wrong I was until I heard you." Amara looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "That's the thing, Tyler. Knowing better means doing better. So start there." For the first time, he nodded not defensively, but with understanding. Weeks passed. The program took shape. Teachers attended workshops about bias and inclusivity. Students worked on art projects that celebrated culture and difference. The library started a new section called Voices That Matter, filled with books by authors of color. And at the heart of it all was Amara's speech, printed, framed, and hung at the entrance of the school. Above it, in bold letters, were the words she had said that day. "The loudest lessons don't come from who talks the most. They come from who listens." Months later, when the governor returned to officially inaugurate the program, she handed Amara a medal. "For courage," she said, "for compassion, and for reminding us all that leadership doesn't come from standing over others. It comes from standing up for what's right." The entire auditorium rose in applause, but Amara didn't see it as a victory. She saw it as a beginning, a seed planted in a place where kindness had once struggled to grow. As she stood on that stage, looking out at the sea of faces, different, humbled, hopeful, she realized something profound. The speech she gave wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone. It was about change. It was about choice. It was about humanity. And as the applause swelled again, Amara whispered quietly to herself, "Maybe this time they'll remember." But somewhere deep in her heart, she knew the world outside those school walls was still waiting, still watching, and her voice wasn't done yet. The sun dipped low behind Crestwood Middle School, casting long shadows across the courtyard where students once mocked, whispered, and looked away. But now, something was different. The laughter that echoed through the halls wasn't cruel anymore. It was warm. The stares weren't judgmental. They were understanding. Amara stood quietly by the notice board, her name printed beside the school's new initiative, the Listening Project. It was the governor's idea, but the message came from her, a program built to remind students and teachers alike that equality begins with empathy. That same afternoon, parents filled the hall for a final assembly. The governor sat in the front row beside Principal Harris, both smiling with quiet pride. When Amara stepped the podium one last time, the entire room fell silent, not out of shock this time, but respect. She looked around at the faces before her. Students, teachers, parents, and officials. People who once couldn't see past her skin now waited to hear her words. She took a deep breath. "When I gave my first speech," she began, "I wasn't trying to make anyone feel guilty. I was trying to make people feel something. Because when we stop feeling, we stop caring. And when we stop caring, we start hurting each other without even realizing it." Her voice was calm but carried power. "I'm standing here today because people chose to listen. And that's where change begins. Not in the biggest speeches or the loudest protests, but in the small moments when we choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and love over fear." She paused, letting the words breathe. "To every student here," she said softly, "remember this. You don't get to choose your skin, but you do get to choose your heart. Don't let the world make you believe that someone's worth depends on their color, accent, or background. Look deeper. Always look deeper." Then her eyes shifted to the adults in the room. "And to the teachers, parents, and leaders," she continued, "children learn more from what we do than what we say. When we laugh at cruel jokes, when we stay silent in the face of wrong, when we judge before we understand, we're teaching lessons we never meant to teach. But when we show compassion, when we defend the voiceless, when we see others as human first, we build a better world for every child watching. No one should ever have to prove their humanity. Not in a classroom, not in a workplace, not anywhere. Because dignity isn't something you earn. It's something everyone deserves." A hush filled the hall. Every eye was on her. Every heart was still. Amara smiled faintly. "We all have a part to play. The students sitting here will one day be the teachers, the bosses, the lawmakers, the parents. And if we can learn to treat each other right, truly right, then maybe one day a child like me won't have to give a speech like this ever again." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Tears glistened in the eyes of parents and teachers alike. The governor herself wiped her cheeks, whispering to those beside her, "That young girl just said what the world has been needing to hear." As the applause filled the room, Amara looked up toward the school banner fluttering above the stage. She thought of every cruel word, every moment she almost gave up, and every person who now stood applauding. She didn't feel anger. She felt hope, because this was what change looked like. She stepped down from the stage, and as the clapping slowly faded, one truth hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. No matter where we come from, no matter the shade of our skin, we are all human, and the color of our hearts will always matter more than the color of our skin. That day, the speech didn't just silence the school, it awakened it. And somewhere deep inside, Amara knew if every heart in that room carried the lesson forward, maybe, just maybe, the world would finally start to listen. Please don't forget to subscribe for more of our stories. Stay updated.